So, anybody like coffee in here besides me? Anybody hopped up on coffee already? If not, you haven't hit the coffee bar. It's okay. I'll hit the coffee bar and do other coffee. I just like to mix and everything else. I'm like an addict. But there's an amazing place that just opened up. I just gotta tell you about it. Okay. There's no. I get nothing. I don't even get like extra points for this. But there's a place that just opened up. If you don't know, called Dutch Brothers. Anybody been there yet? Yeah, a few of you. You might have gone there this morning. You might, whatever. It's good. It's good coffee, good place. But it's kind of like if you've ever watched Seinfeld and the manager becomes like a member of the cult that cleans floors. Dutch Brothers is like that. I mean, if you go, everybody's hopped up on their own stuff. And they're excited and they're happy to see you and they want to talk to you forever. And if they're making the coffee, that means you're going to be there a little bit longer. They will talk to you. And so if you're like an introvert, get the mobile app, order it from takeaway or something like that. But if you're not and you like to talk to people, this is great. Go wait in the line and they'll talk to you. Because that's what happens. And so you go, and the first few times that I went, I'm waiting at the window, and it's not that long of a wait. But I'm telling you, like, they have their people trained in all of the ways of broism, all right? And so they have their people trained. And they are talking to you. They're asking, what are you going to do today? Oh, that sounds great. How's this? Have you done this? Have you blah, blah, blah? Where do you live? Where are you from? What are you doing? Oh, they want to talk to you all the time. You're like, this is great. All right, this is awesome. And so that was my experience the first few times going to Dutch Brothers and going through the drive-thru like that. And I've even heard from other people that they had the same experience. In fact, I was talking to one of our people who recommended Dutch Brothers to somebody else, and then she felt bad afterwards, and she's like, wait, what if they don't talk to them like they did me? Like, was that just a special thing? Like, are they going to feel bad? Like, I'm telling you, like, they've got their people trained really well. And it's like that every single time. But I went one time this week, just a few days ago. And everything's going just like you normally would. I get up to the window and like, oh yeah, how's this going to go? What are you going to do? And I've got a couple meetings today. And then they ask the question. Well, what do you do? I'm a pastor. And I'm telling you, the conversation changed so fast. I'm telling you, this girl that I was talking to, it looked like her mouth got swallowed by the rest of her face. It was like... she wished she could pull back the question, and she wished she could blot out her ears. And then after that, it was like the most awkward silence. She did not know what to say to that. And then eventually it's kind of like, I think that's probably good for some people that would want that. That was all she could come up with. Like, there was nothing else. And then it was like, I'm going to step back away from the window and find your coffee. It was the most awkward experience. And I don't know about you. Has anybody ever had that happen to them where maybe you didn't share that you are a pastor, but you shared that you were a Christian, or they heard that you went to a church, and it's like all of a sudden things change very quickly. So for me, if I just don't want to talk to people on airplanes, the easiest thing for me to do is like, hi, I'm a pastor. They don't want to talk to you. So maybe you should try that. That might work. And then maybe it won't. Maybe they'll want to talk to you and ask you, but that happens. But how many of us struggle sometimes to share with others that we're a Christian? We struggle with it. I sometimes struggle to tell people I'm a pastor because I just know what's going to happen in that conversation. It's going to quickly get shut down. It's like, oh, I don't want to have to say it, but here we go. It just ends it. And while the comfort level and the details might be different for each and every one of us, the chances are that many of us struggle with something sociologists describe as an increasingly post-Christian culture. See, a post-Christian culture is one that rejects any idea of Christianity having a place in the public sphere at all. And one that is actively moving away from Judeo-Christian values. That's what it is. Post-Christian culture is a little bit different. See, it used to be that, people are pre-Christian, meaning they just haven't heard about Jesus. Then it became like they're kind of anti-Christian. And now we're almost like post-Christian, where it's like people don't even know necessarily if they're supposed to be anti-us or not. Because it's like we don't even have anything in the culture that we really represent much. They don't even know what to do with us. There's an author, his name is Lee Beach. He's an author, he's a professor, and he says this is a quote that he has. It says, in the post-Christian revolution, it's fair to say that the church is one of those former power brokers who once enjoyed a place of influence at the cultural table, but has been chased away from its place of privilege and is now seeking to find where it belongs amid the ever-changing dynamics of contemporary culture. If you've never lived in the South and then you've moved to the South, you know exactly what this is like. If you lived somewhere, maybe it was the Northeast or maybe up north in the Midwest, or maybe you've come from a different country, and all of a sudden you've moved to the South. And let me just say, Orlando's not the South, but it's closer. All right, Orlando's just we're just kind of a weird mix of everything. But if you've moved from somewhere else and then you go to the South, you can quickly recognize this. Because see, in the Northeast, at least 15, 20 years ago, it would be that, okay, why would you be a Christian? Why would you be that? But in the South, all of the powerful people, the place to get business done was on a Sunday morning. It was a place to be seen. It might as well be just another country club, but with a message. That's all it was. And it was a place where the powerful people in the community, most people were Christians or claimed to be Christian. There's a pastor, his name is John Tyson, he's in New York City, and he describes three big shifts that have happened that involve Jesus followers in our cultural moment right now. And the first is this, is that Christianity is shifting from the majority to a minority. It's shifting from a majority to a minority. Walking in the way of Jesus is no longer normative. It's not normal, it's increasingly rare. And for those of you, maybe you have a few more years on you, this could be a little bit unsettling for you. Because you remember the time when it was the majority. You remember a time when, like, you could show up to public meetings or you could show up to places and expect that there would be a prayer over a meal. There would be a prayer time, or you might be able to mention Jesus. You might be able to mention your church, and that would be fine, and that might be a good thing. And now you kind of look at it and go, what's going on with society? Like, this is moving away. Now I don't even necessarily know if there's anybody in the rooms that I'm involved with that are believers. See, now to be a follower of Jesus is to be a part of a shrinking minority. Now, the second shift is that Christianity is shifting from the center to the fringes. It's moving from the center to the fringes. Towns that were once built. If you would go into old towns were literally once built around the church. The church would be in the center of the town. Everything else would kind of find its way out. And now it's completely the opposite. We even see this in Orlando. And a few years ago, probably about 25, 30 years ago, there was an area of town that was going to be built. And it's called Lake Nona. And it was going to be built pretty much by one extremely wealthy businessman, who's now in a lot of legal trouble. But it was built by this man. And from day one, his words were, there will never be a church inside our town limits. Never. I won't allow it. It won't happen. I won't sell to any church. I won't allow anyone to lease to a church. It won't happen. And so the only way there would be any churches in Lake Nona for a long, long time was for them to be able to maybe get into a school or something like that. That's it. I dare you to go to Lake Nona. You'll see it. What's amazing is what man plans always gets kind of thrown out the window. And now there's some pretty great churches over there, including one I like called Nona Church. But anyways. That happens. And so here's where we're at. Now it's moving to the fringe. Things like faith and church have been relegated to a private sphere and are often met with suspicion. Because to be a part of the movement of Jesus is to begin moving to the margins. And then finally, he says that Christianity is shifting from respected to disrespected. The word Christian no longer means what it used to mean. Openly identifying as a Christian no longer brings with it any added measure of respect. More and more, it brings some measure of liability. General attitude towards Christianity is a certain level of disrespect. And can I just be honest with you? A lot of this was brought on by ourselves. A lot of this was brought on by Christians. There were people that claimed the word Christian and that didn't act like Christ towards others. And you can name scandal after scandal that's been in the news, or you can just look at individual relationships that have happened with people because Christians didn't act like Christians. And then sin happened, bad things happen, and now people go, you guys are messed up. We don't want to be anything like you. We don't want to have anything to do with you. And so those are some of the shifts that have happened. So what do we do in this kind of world? How do we walk in the way of Jesus in a new and foreign land? How do we walk out our faith in a culture that is increasingly hostile toward us? What does faithfulness look like in the middle of mounting resistance and pressure to assimilate to the behaviors and values of the broader culture around us? See, throughout the Bible, we find a roadmap that does a great job of guiding this cultural reality that we now call home. And I believe that we can stand firm in God's truth, even in a land that doesn't know it or want it. Now, it wasn't always like this. A few decades ago, Christian identity was so common among Americans that it was almost taken for granted. As recently as the early 1990s, roughly 90% of U.S. adults identified as Christian. Now again, we go back to some of that are they really Christians or are they culturally claiming the name? Either way, we just need to be aware. In the early 1990s, not that long ago, I know for some of you on the first row that was a little bit long ago, but for the rest of us in the room, not so much, right? Not that long ago, 90% of Americans would claim to be Christians. But some estimates now they expect only 10% of Gen Z to become followers of Jesus in their lifetime. Only 10%. So you're looking at going from a majority of 90% to within the next 30, 40, 50 years, if things don't change, it might be 10%. Now, this is America. This is not the world, right? We see Christianity growing pretty much everywhere else except for in America and Europe. But everywhere else, it is. 30 years ago, only 5% of Americans claimed no religious affiliation. 20 years ago, that number grew to 17%. And in the last 15 years, the number who say they have no religion is nearly 30% of the country. Like, this is exponentially growing. And one thing is for sure, those who remain a part of Jesus' church, the ground is shifting beneath our feet. And it's not just the numbers of those attending church or claiming no religious affiliation, but these are just markers of a larger movement revealing that for a long time our culture has been changing, and so has Christianity's place in it. There once was a time when speaking openly about your personal faith in Jesus while holding a position in public office, for example, was generally thought to be a normal and admirable thing. Not anymore. Not true anymore. Now a person of faith is generally expected to keep that to yourself, make sure it doesn't interfere with your work, and anything less is considered not just inappropriate, but dangerous. Did you know that? Some people look at you as a Christian and go, you are dangerous. You're dangerous to the mental health of those around you. You are dangerous to the culture. You are dangerous to the community. You are dangerous to your workplace. You are dangerous. And if you feel like sometimes you're an outsider in a land that is no longer familiar, not your own, here's the good news. You don't have to feel that way anymore, because even when feeling like an exile, we can seek the peace and prosperity of our land while holding on to our true citizenship. Now, if we turn this morning, you can go to the Old Testament book of Daniel. If you don't have your Bible, you can pull up the QR notes, which I don't know if you know this or not, but if you hit the QR code in front of you, it does pull up like the Bible app, and it'll have all our notes in there, and you can save them and go back and read them later, and you can add your own notes in there. It's a really useful tool, or just write them down on a piece of paper somewhere, but writing things down is something that definitely is going to help you to remember and process what you are hearing this morning in any week. But if we turn to Daniel, we're going to find a crucial moment for God's people as a major power shift is happening in the ancient Near East. The beginning of this book coincides with Babylon's rise of the Assyrian Empire. A military commander named Nebuchadnezzar is making a name for himself by winning a number of military conquests. He defeats the Egyptians at Carchemish. It's right on the border of modern-day Turkey and Syria. And then Nebuchadnezzar is made king. And then under his rule, Babylon grows stronger and stronger, eventually reaching kind of the height of its power. And our story this morning begins with Nebuchadnezzar surrounding Jerusalem at her gates. In Daniel chapter 1, verse 1 through 2, it says this. It says, "In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord delivered Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, along with some of the articles from the temple of God. These he carried off to the temple of his God in Babylonia and put in the treasure house of his God." See, the author of Daniel immediately pulls back the curtain to show us that there's more going on here. God's people have been rebelling against God. And now God was going to allow them to be sifted and processed in a way that he needed them to so that they would eventually turn back to him. See, Jehoiakim, the king of Judah, he's being unfaithful. And in God's sovereignty allows rulers and kings to rise and fall. And so even before elections in the end, all earthly kings and kingdoms are temporary. See, Babylon may be wealthy and powerful in this moment, but God will eventually judge their actions. And in fact, the next time we see the Babylonians kind of sporting the stuff they steal from God's temple is on the eve of their downfall. And perhaps most incredible, it's God's ability to use this earthly chaos to accomplish his heavenly purposes. But for now, Nebuchadnezzar and the powers of Babylon capture Jerusalem. Lives are lost, and the kingdom of Judah falls. In verse 3, it says, "Then the king ordered Ashpenaz, chief of his court officials, to bring into the king's service some of the Israelites from the royal family and the nobility. Young men without any physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude for every kind of learning, well-informed, quick to understand, and qualified to serve in the king's palace. He was to teach them the language and literature of the Babylonians. The king assigned them to a daily amount of food and wine from the king's table. And they were to be trained for 3 years. And after that, they were to enter into the king's service. Among those who were chosen were some from Judah: Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah." See, here we're introduced to Daniel and his friends for the first time. You might have heard of them. You might not have. If you ever heard of Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, those are their different names. Here we're reading their Hebrew names. Same guys. But imagine for a moment what just took place and what it would be like to experience that for yourself. Imagine, like Daniel, you're just a Jewish teenager, raised in a good home in a good part of town. You work hard in school and you show a lot of promise. You're a smart kid with relatives serving in various positions of key leadership in Jerusalem, and there is a bright future ahead of you, right? Because they took the best. Then suddenly the Babylonian force that defeated the Egyptians grows in power and descends on your hometown. And then Jerusalem is violently attacked and quickly defeated. People that you've known your entire life are killed, including some of your family members. And then by force, you're dragged away from your home, away from your family, away from the temple, away from everything that you've ever known, to a foreign land that is hostile to your faith and the God that you serve. As an exile, you're put into a 3-year cultural immersion program designed to convert you to a different lifestyle, values, practices, and worship of the gods of Babylon. erasing all the faith in your God and in your life? What do you do when you're in a place that you've never been before, living as an exile? How in the world do you remain faithful in that kind of environment? How does anyone go through that and remain faithful to the Lord through it all? And while this experience of exile may feel new to some of us in this cultural moment, the truth is in the Bible we find this everywhere. Exile is actually a theme that we find throughout the stories and experiences of the people of God. From Genesis and Daniel to Esther that we just read about a month ago, and Ezra, to Nehemiah and the Chronicles, all the way to Jesus. Remember, Jesus was in exile in Egypt. Do you remember that? And also the letters of the New Testament. See, Peter, one of Jesus' friends and followers and a father of the faith in the early church, actually opens up one of his letters with this line in 1 Peter 1:1. He says, Peter, an apostle of Jesus Christ, to God's elect, and then get this, exiles scattered throughout the provinces of Pontus, Galatia, and then all over the place. He keeps going, name a few places. And then later on in that same letter, in 1 Peter 1:17, he says that you should live out your time as foreigners here in reverent fear. And he refers to followers of Jesus in chapter 2, verse 11, as foreigners and exiles. To follow Christ and to live on earth is to live like an exile. That's who we are. Like so many who came before us, in an increasingly post-Christian nation, we are exiles. More and more, this will be our experience. All right, let's quit. Let's go home. Done? Encouraged? Feel great? No, we have hope, right? We have hope. So what do we do with this? How do we respond? What does real faithfulness look like living in an everyday exile? How do you respond to living in exile? Let me ask you, how do you respond to living in exile? I've seen some of your Facebook posts. Maybe you don't respond so great. If you've seen me react sometimes, maybe I don't respond so great. The first response is this. I'm going to give you a couple different responses. The first response, or maybe temptation, is something called separatism. It's separatism. What does that mean? It means this. As believers, we don't engage. We don't enter in. We don't get involved. Do you have a posture of disengagement? See, we do everything, in separatism, we do everything that we can to remove ourselves from the broader culture and separate ourselves from anyone who doesn't look like, act like, or agree with us, putting distance between us and those people. Anybody know somebody like that? Anybody ever been one of those people like that? See, the way this typically looks for us is entering into Christian spheres and never leaving. We create our own separate Christian version of everything. We worship at our Christian church. We get our coffee at the Christian coffee shop. We shop at Christian stores. We wear Christian clothing. We hang out with only our Christian friends. And while none of those things are bad in and of itself, it's great to develop Christian community. It's great to listen and put great things in your mind by listening to Christian music. It's cool that you can share your faith by wearing a Christian t-shirt. Nothing in and of itself is wrong there. But when we do this every day across every area of our lives, it becomes very difficult, if not impossible, for the church to have any kind of real impact on the world. That's what separatism does. It's a little dangerous. So how are you making an impact in your world? Your neighborhoods, schools, communities, sports teams? Now, separatism is the first response or temptation. The second temptation or response is syncretism. Syncretism. This just means that you're adopting and passively accepting the values and practices of the world around you. This is making small compromises, not wanting to be excluded or face backlash, and making it a point to just sort of blend in and go with the flow. We start doing things the culture around us says really aren't a big deal. We stop doing the things that fuel our faith and make us distinctively Christian. We come on Sundays to be with our church a whole lot less. It's more optional. We distance ourselves from Christian relationships that challenge us. We slowly begin to accept things as morally right that Scripture would say is morally wrong. And before we know it, it becomes harder and harder to differentiate our life from the lives of those around us that don't share our faith. They don't share our purposes, values, rhythms, practices, and lifestyles. We become no different than anyone else. This is precisely what the Babylonians intended for Daniel and his friends. And honestly, who could blame them if they did, right? I mean, after everything that they'd gone through, everything that they had lost, after being forcefully taken from the only home that they'd ever known and exiled into a culture that wanted nothing to do with their faith, who could blame them? Who wouldn't have understood that in the name of survival and sanity, Daniel and his friends just sort of tabled their faith and adopted the broader culture's ways of life or values and worship? But it's not what Daniel and his friends did. They don't adopt everything the culture around them peddles, nor do they cut themselves off from the life of the culture either. See, our response as believers has to be different. We can't be separatist. We can't be syncretist. We can't choose either one of those. Our response needs to be altogether different. One that deeply engages in the culture in which God places them without sacrificing our integrity. See, in a letter that was written by the prophet Jeremiah from Jerusalem to the first wave of exiles in Babylon, a group that would include the guys, Daniel, that we're talking about today. He writes this. He gives his people very specific instructions on how to live in exile. And this is in Jeremiah 29, 4 through 6. Some of you love that verse, Jeremiah 29, 11. For I have plans for you, right? Hope and a future. Remember what that hope and future was? Exile. Hope and a future. This is what he says. This is just a few verses before that. Jeremiah 29, 4 through 6. It says, "This is what the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel, says to all those I carried into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon. Build houses and settle down. Plant gardens and eat what they produce. Marry and have sons and daughters. Find wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage so that they too may have sons and daughters. Increase in number there. Do not decrease." God stresses a couple really important things for his people that are definitely truths for exiles living in any time. Do all you can to make sure the community of God stays intact. Don't lose your identity or distinctiveness. In fact, grow it. Have kids. Stay rooted together in community and grow the family of God where he has you. But God also says you won't be going back. Things aren't going to return to the way they were. This is your new home. So build houses. Settle in. Plant gardens. Put down roots and prepare to live as my people in this time and place. And then God takes it one step further. A verse says, and he says, also, seek the peace and prosperity of the city to which I have carried you into exile. Pray to the Lord for it, because if it prospers, you too will prosper. Wait, what? Pray for these people that just dragged me out? Pray for their prospering? This is Babylon. These are the people that just attacked us. These are the ones that dragged us from our homes. These are our captors. These are our oppressors. These are the ones who want nothing to do with you, God. And you want us to pray for them? Not only that, you want us to work for the peace and prosperity of these people in this place? To which God says yes. Yep. See, God's character is revealed in how we respond to living in exile. You want to see if God's character is building into you? How do you respond when people treat you with hostility because of your faith? Even in the midst of culture that is full of all kinds of things that don't reflect God's character or intent, God's people are encouraged to pray and work for that community to flourish. And here's the other cool thing. God hasn't given up hope on anyone yet. Even in a culture that openly rejects the Lord and promotes the worship of other gods, God is willing to pour out his blessing and work in the midst of the mess that people have created for themselves. And if he hasn't given up hope on them, neither should we. As Christians, we got to stop cursing the darkness and bless it. This is the kind of God we worship. He's good. He's beautiful. He's at work. And he calls us to join him in his work. We must seek the peace and prosperity of our land while holding on to our true citizenship. Don't compromise your character. Don't just act like everyone else and go with the flow. Don't stop living your faith out loud because it has become unpopular or there might be a price to pay if you do. Why? Because God's not done. God's not done. He doesn't need you to quietly separate because there are people here that need the hope and the joy that you have in Christ. And they're not going to get it if you separate. But they're also not going to get it if you look nothing different from them, you live totally like them, and you have nothing in your life that looks holy, that looks joyful. You're not. See, he's not done with you. He's not done with Orlando. He's not done with our nation. And you have a part to play in what he's going to do if you are willing to be faithful. And when we do that, we'll find something beautiful and true, something that God's people have experienced for themselves throughout history, that God does some of his best work through exiles. In Babylon, the culture around Daniel and his friends wanted them to fit in, to stop standing out, and to leave behind their faith. It's almost always easier to go along with everyone else than to stand firm in what you believe. Anybody experience that? It's way easier. But what if the life this world offers leads us to missing out on the life God created us to live? The world promises happiness through success, approval, and comfort. But we all know those things never last. We still end up feeling empty. And we believe that's why Jesus came, to offer us something better. And John, one of the disciples, one of Jesus' closest friends, remembers Jesus saying this in John 10:10. You're never going to stop hearing it at this church. John 10:10. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. And he's talking about the religious people, right? He's talking about the religious people. He's talking about the guys that are going to come claiming to be like him. No. These are wolves coming. See, those are thieves. They're coming to steal your joy. They're coming to oppress you. But I have come so that they may have life and have it to the full. What if we began living like Jesus called us to? If our lives were to the full, wouldn't the rest of your friends, wouldn't the rest of your coworkers, wouldn't the rest of your community want what you have? Much more. Much more. But to have it to the full. And if you don't have it to the full, it's probably because you're trying to fill your cup somewhere else other than Jesus. You're filling it with busyness. You're filling it with stuff. You're filling it with relationships that aren't God-honoring. You're filling it with pride. You're filling it with all kinds of different things, but you're not filling it with Jesus. You might even be filling it with Christian service. Good things can also become idols that leave you empty. And so Jesus says there's thieves that come to steal, kill, and destroy. But I have come so that they may have life and have it to the full. Then this is the best part. I'm the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. Who's the sheep? We are. Jesus has laid down his life for us. See, we believe that Jesus came to give us real life by offering his own life as a sacrifice. And we believe he offers freedom from the things that weigh us down, forgiveness for our mistakes, and hope that never runs out. And so today the question is, what are you trying to fill your cup with? Are you trying to fill it with being good? Are you trying to fill it with fitting in? Are you trying to fill it with a lot of things that the world has to offer? Or are you going to lay down your life, acknowledge that you need a Savior, and allow Jesus to fill your cup? A cup that will overflow. You want joy in your life? Seek Jesus. Seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these other things, they'll be taken care of. You want to have great community? Follow Jesus. You want to have a good self-esteem? Follow Jesus. He'll give you God esteem. You want to get out of loneliness? Follow Jesus. He's a great friend, great father. You want to have direction for your life, purpose for your life? Follow Jesus. You want to have joy in your life, even in the midst of pain, even in the midst of being in exile? Follow Jesus. And as you do that, then live life like the exiles that we see today. Not completely separate from the world, but not becoming like the world. Isn't there a verse that says something like that we would be in it, not of it? That's what Jesus calls us to. Let's pray.